And they were really able to encourage each other during these trials. And even when it seemed like going with the flow, going with the rest of the crowd would have been the easiest thing to do, standing up for what is right was more likely to happen because of the influence they had on each other. And so here we see this positive example of Daniel and his friends, because traits of the right kinds of friends are going to encourage you to grow. They're going to encourage you to grow in your walk with God, grow in increasing your relationship with God. But the wrong types of friends are not going to do that. So the friends that you have now, are they encouraging you and are they challenging you to grow in your walk with? Welcome back to the Sunday to Society podcast. I'm your host, Riley, where we help you go from the pews to the public square. We release new episodes every Monday on your favorite podcasting apps, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Amazon Music, and wherever else you listen to audio podcasts. We release the video version on YouTube as well as Spotify. And if you haven't already, I encourage you to leave us a follow wherever possible. Or if you're watching us on YouTube, to hit that subscribe button as well as that thumbs up button. And that helps us get the podcast out to even more people. I want to talk today about choosing the right friends and how godly relationships shape your life. And when we think about how our friends influence us, I want you to first think of your 5 closest friends. And how are those 5 closest friends shaping your life? Because they are either drawing you closer towards God or they are drawing you further away from God. And an example that I can think of in the Old Testament is after Solomon had give the kingdom over to Rehoboam. Rehoboam had got around some friends that had encouraged him to split the kingdom. And of course, it was never God's design for there to be a human king anyway. The children of Israel called for an earthly king, and they had anointed Saul, and Saul went away from the Lord, and then David became the next king over Israel, and then David's son Solomon, and then Solomon's son Rehoboam. Well, Rehoboam had been around the wrong type of friends, and they had influenced him enough to convince him to split the kingdom into 2 different parts. One of those kingdoms had a couple of good kings, the southern kingdom, but the northern kingdom never had any godly kings. And because of that, they went into captivity before the southern kingdom did. Now, eventually they both ended up into captivity, and they weren't reunited until much later on. But all of this stemmed back to Rehoboam not being influenced by the right type of friends. And when we think of our closest friends and the thought of either they are drawing us closer to God or they are drawing us away from God, we have to think, what type of friends am I allowing into my life and how are they shaping me? Because friends matter a whole lot more than we might initially think. Because friendships aren't really neutral. They're either drawing us away from God or drawing us to God. The book of Proverbs, where Solomon is writing to his son Rehoboam, he is wanting his son to gain wisdom. And in Proverbs 13, he's talking about you gain wisdom by association. Now, when you think of particular friends, they are often associated with other friends. In fact, if somebody were to commit a crime, if another person was just in the car with them, doesn't matter if they committed the crime or not, they can be found guilty just by association. The friends that we have are influencing us either for the good or for the bad. In fact, in 1 Corinthians 15, there is corrupting power that is shown by the wrong type of company. In fact, if you might think that you are going to influence somebody for the good, but that person is a bad influence on you, 9 times out of 10, or probably 99 times out of 100, the person who's the bad influence is going to be influencing you in the wrong way. And that's just how influence works. The people that you are around the most are the people that are going to be influencing you the most. Have you ever maybe been with a friend a little too long and you start finding yourself talking like them or using some of the same words and the same mannerisms that they have? Why is that? It's because the people that we spend the most time around is the people that we become the most like. And this is often the example with kids and teenagers. They often become more like their friends because they might go to the same school as them, or they might hang out with them many times after school, or both. And really, peer pressure is something that we are often think about with young people, but it really carries over into adulthood as well. They might encourage you to maybe steal something or encourage you to do something that is wrong. But if we build ourselves around the right type of friends, then we are less likely to find ourselves in trouble or less likely to find ourselves growing further away from God than if we had the right type of friends, right type of influence, and bringing ourselves closer to God. Unfortunately, in the society that we live in today, what we deem as friends is a very loose, very broad term. In the case of social media, we have friends or followers. And I bet if you were to look through your Facebook friend list or your Instagram follower list, some of those people might be people that you don't interact with anymore. Maybe you lived in one location, moved to a different location, and just because of distance, you don't interact with those people anymore. Doesn't mean that you don't call them friends, but just because of the geographical setting, you might not find yourself being influenced by them a whole lot anymore. Maybe you look at your friend list or your follower list on social media, and there's people on there that you've never even met before. Or they're people that you've met one or two times, and you wouldn't really call them your friends. You might consider them more of an acquaintance. They still find a spot on your Facebook friend list or your Instagram follower list. And that's not really real influence, but the people that you spend time with the most, those are the ones that are going to influence you the most. And I want us to look at some examples of both positive and negative of people who influenced others for the good and for the bad. And the first one, although there's many that we could choose from, the first one I want us to look at is Daniel and his friends, found in Daniel's chapter 1, 2, and 3. In Daniel chapter 1, we see the curtain coming up, and Babylon is coming in and taking the children of Israel captive. They take them to Babylon, and eventually we find Daniel and his friends standing before the king. And the king gives this large banquet where they are allowed to participate in that feast. However, Daniel chooses not to partake in the king's meat. And we find out later that because of this, Daniel was able to stand out and be placed into a spot of prominence under King Nebuchadnezzar. And what were to happen if Daniel would have brought himself under the subjection of the people that were around him and he just fit in with the rest of the crowd? How much of an influence would he have been under King Nebuchadnezzar than if he had just went with the rest of the crowd? On the other hand, you have Daniel's friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, as they are oftentimes referred to in their Babylonian names. When they are standing before this golden statue and all the instruments play and they are commanded to bow down before King Nebuchadnezzar and that golden statue, that they choose not to. And that happens a second time and they don't do it. And eventually they are cast into the fiery furnace. Well, what were to happen if one of those three Hebrew children there had been influenced by the wrong friend and they had chose to bow down to them? But instead they were rather choosing to follow after Christ and influence each other in a positive manner. And because of that, they went into the fiery furnace. They come out not burned or singed or smell of smoke or nothing like that. In fact, the fire was so hot that the people who threw them into the fiery furnace died because of the flames from the furnace. But they all influenced each other to stand together, not out of peer pressure, but stand together out of conviction because they knew what was right and what they needed to do to stand up for that. And because of that, God blessed them. And they were really able to encourage each other during these trials. And even when it seemed like going with the flow, going with the rest of the crowd would have been the easiest thing to do, standing up for what is right was more likely to happen because of the influence they had on each other. And so here we see this positive example of Daniel and his friends, but we could also think of David and Jonathan. And we won't spend too much time into that example, but what we can take away from that is they were able to encourage each other, even when Jonathan's father Saul wanted to kill David. And so we see that positive example of Daniel and his friends, or David and Jonathan. They encouraged each other to do what is right. We've already mentioned it already, but a negative example is Solomon's son Rehoboam, who, rather than going and getting counsel from his father, who was asked by God for anything that he desired, Solomon asked for wisdom. And in doing so, Solomon became the wisest man that there lived in the land. And rather than Rehoboam going and getting counsel and guidance from him, he goes to his friends, and his friends give him some bad advice. And that bad advice was to not listen to his father, split the kingdom, do what is best for you and not the best of the entire nation. And because of that, because of listening to the wrong influence, because of having the wrong type of friends, his friends encouraged him to do the wrong thing, follow after himself, split the kingdom, and because of that, there are devastating consequences that affect not only the kingdom then and there, but it really make the kingdom fall into this devastating place of captivity and idolatry and finding themselves in the wrong places over and over and over again, not just for a short amount of time, but for years and decades. And so, as we look at these people who had both good friends and bad friends, we see very quickly that it is super important, that it's really important for us to have the right type of friends. Another positive example is Paul and Barnabas. Although they had initially left the ministry and went in different directions, we do see them partnering up together in the beginning of Paul's missionary journeys. They encouraged each other. In fact, Barnabas is known as a great encourager, and they held each other accountable and they were partners. And this relationship worked so well, and they were a positive influence, and we think all of what they were able to get accomplished during their ministry together, there's a whole lot of positive things that happened. They were able to encounter somebody like Bar Jesus, who was really a false prophet or a fake prophet, and they were able to get that great victory there, and as well as bring other people to Christ. Whereas if they were a bad influence on each other, or they didn't hold each other accountable, or they weren't encouraging each other, then they wouldn't have gotten nearly as much done as before. And here we see that there really is this great importance on building our lives around the right type of friends, because the right type of friends are going to encourage us and help us along. And like Rehoboam, the negative influence, the negative friends are going to drive us in the opposite direction and really give us some devastating consequences from choosing those types of friends. So, when we are looking for new friends, what should we be looking out for? What are some traits in good friends and bad friends that we should be looking out for? And if it really comes down to it, how should we choose our friends? And so I want us to firstly look at traits of the right kinds of friends. The first trait that we can look at and look for in the right type of friend is they encourage your faith. Just like Paul and Barnabas, or David and Jonathan, or Daniel and his friends, they all encouraged each other in their faith, to increase their faith in God, to rely on God more. They encourage them to grow stronger in their relationship with God. And this is a good trait of the right type of friends. They should be always encouraging you in the things of God. And when you think of those five closest friends that you have, are they encouraging your faith? And if they are not, then maybe we need to look at the closeness of that type of friendship. Are they encouraging? Or after I'm done spending time with them or talking with them, how do I feel after that? And we'll talk some more about that here in just a second. Trait number two, do they speak the truth in love? Now, do they give you the truth? Number one. Sometimes friends like to maybe beat around the bush or not give you the truth, or they'll give you the truth in the way that you want to hear it. When we think of the traits of the right kinds of friends, are they speaking the truth, but are they speaking the truth in love? Not meaning that they do it harshly, not doing it because they are telling us what we want to hear when we want to hear them. And sometimes we need to be told the truth, even though we might not like it in the moment. We still need friends that are surrounding us that will be speaking the truth. And they need to be speaking the truth in love, not out of a place of harsh, but sometimes it takes the right type of friend to put their arm around us and say, hey, this is what you need to hear, whether you like it or not. It is the truth. And they need to do it out of a place of love, because a true friend, the right type of friend, is going to do that to help strengthen us and help to encourage us in a way that grows our relationship closer to God. But also, they need to be able to speak the truth and have that healthy friendship, that they feel like they're able to do that without us getting upset or angry. Trait number three, they need to challenge you to grow. They need to challenge you to grow in your own spiritual walk. In fact, Proverbs says, iron sharpeth iron. When people are working with metals, the way that they can get iron to get sharper, especially if they're making a sword or some type of weapon like that, they have to sharpen it. And they do that very methodically. They do that very intentionally. They do that with the right type of tools. And if you don't have the right type of friends that are encouraging you to grow in your walk with God, or to rely on God more, or pointing you closer to a relationship with God, then we need to look at the sense of, are these the right type of friends that I have? Because traits of the right kinds of friends are going to encourage you to grow. They're going to encourage you to grow in your walk with God, grow in increasing your relationship with God. But the wrong types of friends are not going to do that. So, the friends that you have now, are they encouraging you and are they challenging you to grow in your walk with? When I think of another trait of the right types of friends, I think of, are the friends that I have going to stick with you through trials? When I think of the prodigal son, here the prodigal son had gotten this amount of money. He goes to a far country, spends all of his money. He has these fair weather friends. And when the money dries out and the prodigal son is sitting there amongst the pigs, his friends are nowhere to be found. In fact, they only used him for his money. And when he's at his low point, there's none of his friends around. But a trait of the right types of friends is that no matter what you are going through, that they are there sticking with you. Going back to Paul and Barnabas, Barnabas was that encourager to Paul. Do you think that everything that Paul encountered in the different towns and cities that they went to was good and encouraging? Barnabas stuck it out for quite a long time. And then eventually they split and went into opposite directions and were both still effective for the ministry of Jesus Christ, but they were encouraging each other and stuck through the different trials that they encountered in the various places throughout their ministries together. And so we really need friends who are going to stick with us through those trials and be that type of friend for them as well when they are going through trials. So these are different traits of the right kinds of friends. They encourage your faith, they speak the truth in love, they challenge you to grow, and they stick with you through trials. But What about some dangerous traits or the wrong types of traits in friendships? The first one is gradual compromise. They might say, "Oh, it's no big deal if you just do this now, it's not that big of a deal." But those things kind of snowball. It's this, and then you compromise in this, and then another area, and another area, and another area. And eventually, if you look at it from the 30,000-foot view, you have gone a whole lot further than you had initially planned on going. And it happened one small step at a time. And so there's this gradual compromise in the wrong types of friends and these types of traits. They might encourage you to rather, hey, it's not that big of a deal. If you just do this one time, nobody will notice. And eventually you do go that long distance. Another wrong trait in the wrong type of friends is a loss of total discernment when ungodly thinking becomes normalized. And that kind of goes along with the gradual compromise. And they give you this loss of discernment. You don't know what is right and what is wrong. And that happens over a long period of time. It's not something that happens just in a short amount of time. It's something that happens overnight. It's something that happens over a long period of time. And they get you to change your thinking and begin to thinking about what brings glory to myself rather than what brings glory to God. Another dangerous trait is emotional and spiritual drain. And this is done by those who pull your focus away from God and away from Christ. And those are the people who are pulling you further away from God. Like the example of Rehoboam, those are the people who get you to lose your discernment and going to what you know to be right and instead listening to them and doing what makes you feel good in the moment. And after walking away from spending time with them or talking with them, you feel this just spiritual drain because they are pulling you further away from God. And I think of Samson in the Old Testament in Judges, where Samson really finds himself amongst the wrong type of crowd. And he has this relationship with somebody who he wasn't allowed to have a relationship with. And eventually he starts toying with her, and eventually he is brought down to the place of an animal, all because he gradually compromised. He had a loss of discernment. He had a spiritual drain, and eventually he has his eyes plucked out and his strength gone, and he's brought down to the place of an animal. And this really is the ultimate example of how wrong influences can affect us far greater than we had initially anticipated. And really, these so-called good time friends can prevent us from making great leaps in our growth with God. And so when we think about the people that I'm surrounding myself with, and you think about those five closest friends that you have, what types of traits do these friends display? Do they display the right types of traits in their friendship? Or do they display the wrong types of traits in friendships? Now, let's talk about how you can build and how you can maintain those right types of friendships. And one of the first things that I can think of is to pray specifically that God would bring godly people into your life that would encourage you in your walk with God. Pray and pray specifically that God would do that. And maybe you find yourself in a situation where you don't have that many friends. And as you get older, adult friendships tend to become fewer and far between. And knowing how to find those friendships and where to find them and how to maintain them is crucial. And you should be the type of friend that you want to have. If you are always trying to pull people away from God and you are trying to discourage people in God's things, or we could say that you are sometimes negative or look at things through the lens of what will make me feel better right now, that's not the type of friend that you want. So why should you be that type of friend to somebody else? We should instead be the type of friend that we want to have. So that means encouraging other people in their walk with God. That means speaking the truth, even sometimes when they don't want to hear it, and speaking the truth in love. That means sticking through with people when they're having a hard time and challenging people in their walk with God. So we should be the right type of friend that we want to have. We should also invest in our church community and be involved there. And that's really a great place to find like minded people that want to encourage not only their walk with God, but encourage your walk with God as well. And being involved, not just showing up on Sunday, sitting in the back pew, and then leaving right at the very end. But how do you maintain the right types of friendships? It really boils down to setting the right type of boundaries. And this can be done when people are trying to get you off of course and trying to pull you away and further from the things of God. And setting those types of boundaries will help keep those ungodly influences away from getting those types of things away from your walk with God. And so we have to be setting boundaries and sticking to those boundaries, not just setting them and then eventually changing those boundaries or going past those boundaries or whatever it might be. Instead, we need to be having those boundaries and sticking to them. And as we begin to wind down this episode, I think of the ultimate friend. And that ultimate friend is Jesus Christ. Because Jesus Christ is the perfect friend. He's loyal, he's truthful, he's sacrificial. In fact, the Bible says there's a friend who sticketh closer to a brother, and it's talking about Jesus Christ. And when we line ourselves up with Jesus Christ, who is that perfect friend. In fact, in the book of John, John 15, Jesus calls his disciples friends. In fact, the Bible also describes Jesus as a friend to sinners. And I think of the ultimate friend, and if Christ is to be our example, should we not model ourselves after Jesus Christ? And how was Jesus Christ a good friend? He was pointing people toward to his Father. He was aligning himself up with his Father and pointing people to him. And he was kind and compassionate to people. He spoke the truth, and not in a harsh way, but in a loving way. And if you find yourself not having friends, Jesus is the ultimate friend. And so, again, as we think about who are your 5 closest friends, and are they pulling you away from God or are they pushing you closer to God? And maybe you have some friends that you need to maybe distance yourself from because of those wrong types of traits. And that's okay to do that. Set up those boundaries, but strengthen those godly friendships that you do have and cherish those things. And if you need help in determining and discernment, don't be afraid to seek out a mentor that can help you, somebody who's older and wiser, and that can help you in those things. Maybe even asking somebody from the outside to say, hey, is this person a bad influence or a good influence on me? And sometimes we can be blind to those things. So we need somebody from the outside that can bring some insight into the situation. But as you think about your good friends, I encourage you to pray for those friends and for those friendships, and that those friendships would continue to flourish in building your relationship with God even closer. And that you would pray for that your friendship would be maintained, and that you would encourage each other, like Paul and Barnabas, to draw closer to God. And I hope I've given you some things to think about, and to really take a look at your closest friendships and say, are these people drawing me closer to God or are they pushing me away from God? If you haven't already, I encourage you to hit that subscribe button on YouTube, or if you're listening to us on Apple Podcast or Spotify, hit that follow button and hit that thumbs up button on YouTube as well, and leave us a comment wherever possible. And that helps us get the podcast out to even more people. If you haven't already, I encourage you to follow us on Instagram at Sunday to Society. You can also like us on our Facebook page at Sunday to Society Podcast over there. I hope you have a great day, and God bless.